Welcome to Bridging Chicago, a podcast that aims to connect our listeners to Chicago's business, community, cultural, and charity leaders.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Bridging Chicago. We are celebrating season 7 of the podcast. We have been so fortunate to have the seasons up and on our website for you. Of course, at bridgingchicago.com, where you can find our previous 6 episodes as well as now season 7. And we are really excited to have another amazing guest with us today, Clara Lucia. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot to talk about. But first, let's have you introduce yourself and tell us your Chicago story, because we are Bridging Chicago, and that's where we love to start.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nathan, for having me. So I am originally from Colombia, and that is Colombia with an O. I like to clarify that always.
Yeah, especially now.
Correct. So Colombia with an O, and I came here to the U.S. in 1999, which seems like a bajillion years ago. And sadly, I came here because at that point, the economy in Colombia kind of collapsed. I graduated from my university with a degree, a bachelor's in communications and journalism. And I tried to find a job and I couldn't. So fortunately, or kind of a meant to be story, I knew a family that was living here in Chicago. And they say, why don't you come for a couple of weeks? And surely enough, I took a plane here and I got here on a very cold day in February. And I was amazed about not only the frigid temperatures, but I was in awe of the trees. The trees didn't have any leaves. And I'm like, what's going on here? Where did I just arrive? I had no clue where Chicago was. I had to look it up in a map. At that point, we looked at maps, physical maps. And my adventure into what it was going to be my new life, almost kind of a new identity, and really the opportunity to become who I am now up here.
That's amazing. I can't imagine. I grew up here in Illinois, and I can't imagine coming here in February without knowing what Chicago is like, because really, unless you come from anywhere north of Chicago, it's got to be like a culture shock, just even weather-wise, of like, why do people live here? It's so sad.
Well, 20 some years later, I still ask myself, why am I here? And it's because we experienced a beautiful spring and summer. And that's what keeps us here. And people are incredible as well. But it was a cultural shock. And I tell you, Nathan, I think at that point, it was the beginning of finding my own identity and finding really what I wanted to do with my life and pursue perhaps things that, in back at home, I wouldn't been able to do it. So it was really kind of like an open door. And I took a risk, and, 2 weeks turned into years and years. And I did a lot of things before becoming a business owner. I cleaned houses. I cooked for people. I even went into auditing some schools. And I did a lot of things that were not necessarily what I truly wanted to do. But they gave me the resilience that I needed to then, years later, become a business owner.
Wow. When you moved here, you obviously needed to get work. You needed to start making money to make yourself able to live and do what you need to do. So how did you feel about coming to a new place and then immediately needing to start finding work or finding a way to live?
I tell you, having that family that welcomed me into their home, it was a blessing. I mean, I'm still somewhat close to them because you need allies in your life. You need people that come alongside and that support you in the good times and in the challenging times. So they were that for me. And I think relationships, who knows who. And little by little, I started kind of exploring a network of opportunities. And, thankfully, I was able to find a company that believed in who I was, that believed in what I was bringing to the table. They were exploring having accounts within the Hispanic community, the Hispanic market. And they hired me, and they actually gave me a sponsor visa.
Wow.
So I was fortunate enough to have been in this country legally all the time. And the opportunity to work legally in this country was as a gift. And obviously, after that, then it's kind of like the decisions, do I stay or do I come back? Right. And it's always kind of like that pull and take. It's almost like a regressing and progressing. And, family is all back at home, and I really, missed them, and I couldn't leave the country because I was in a legal process. So that was really hard. Hard. And at the end of the day, Nathan, what I realized is I need to think about me so that I can be in a better place so that I can then help my family back at home.
Yeah.
And I think that became really kind of like a true north of, okay, I need to establish myself. I need to find my own path so that I can be in a better place so that I can support them.
It's easy to forget that when you came here, or maybe easier for someone else to forget that when you came here, you had a degree.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't come here with I mean, maybe not much in terms of finances or whatever, but you had a degree. You had something that was very valuable. How do you feel people interacted with you when you first came here? Did you feel like they sort of treated you like you had a degree, or did they treat you like you were, not to be offensive, but like a poor Colombian coming to Chicago trying to get a job,
It's a great question, and these questions are kind of like taking me back on time.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I forget all of that, but it was a mix. I think there were people, truly the people that were supporting me believed that I could do something with my degree and that eventually I would be able to like use it, for what I really wanted it.
Yeah.
But the majority, I would say, they just looked at me as one more immigrant, like one more person kind of like coming to, do whatever.
Right.
And at the beginning, I had to do whatever.
Right.
I had to do whatever it was available, whatever, came to me and whatever opportunity it was given to me. So sometimes saying yes to what you don't really want to do actually opens up a realm of possibilities, and everything teaches you, right? Like for me, those things that I did taught me a lesson, and they kept me humbled.
Yeah.
So I think that's it's a mix, but it's always that a sense of I am an immigrant, I am a minority, and a sense of needing to prove myself over and over.
Yeah.
Like I deserve this, I'm worthy of this, and I can be a contribution. So those things are kind of in the back of my mind, kind of pushing me forward to keep going.
And obviously you pushed yourself enough to then begin your consulting company, Breakthrough Consulting. So tell us about the transition from finding work to creating your own company and now doing this. What was that like, and what made you really want to enable to start this new company?
Yeah, good question. So I was in corporate America for a while.
Okay.
So I was part of that culture and that kind of big idea of a big system and a big corporation and doing all of that. And it was very challenging. It was very challenging from the moment I got in to the moment that I left. And I realized that there's a lot of things that you need to pretend to be in order to survive corporate America, which is sadly still a reality today.
Yeah.
And I think there was a combination of those things and then really a true conversation with myself about what is it that you want to do with your life? What is it that you want to do with your gifts, with your talents, with your natural, skills? How can you really make a grander, difference around you? And then, it was one of those, it was kind of like a wake up call. Like you wake up one morning and you're like, wait a minute, is this really it?
Yeah.
And I started, asking myself those questions, and there were, people that would come in and will kind of like leave a little message.
Yeah.
And then maybe it was a service at the church. I did a lot of missionary work in the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
And that also set a different tone coming back. I couldn't sit still in my desk. I couldn't really kind of like feel that was the end of my professional life. I needed something else, something more meaningful, more fulfilling. And I, came to an agreement with the company that I was in that there was nothing else I could give them. So perhaps it was the best time to kind of like part ways. Yeah. And I took a step in faith. It was a big leap. I mean, I knew that my foundation was about to be shaken, and it was. I had some sort of a plan, but not really a solid one. Yeah. And I just went for it. And thankfully at that point, my husband was very supportive. At that point, after a long time waiting for my, paperwork and all of that was approved. So I said, what would be the worst thing that can happen? the worst thing that can happen is that nothing works and I have to go back and find a job. So I went for it. And breaking through consulting and coaching was birthed from the idea that I got looking at my son perform at a soccer tryout. And looking at him and all the other little kids, like trying to kick the ball and, kind of shine through so that at the end they were chosen, right, to belong to the team. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these kids are trying to break through.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, that's the name of my company, Breaking Through. At any given point in our lives, we all are trying to break through something.
Yeah.
And I put it breaking because it's an action, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
We're breaking through something, a challenge. We're taking a risk. We're trying to become better people. Yeah. So that became kind of my inspiration for my company. And here I am 10 years after celebrating that big milestone.
And kind of to your earlier point, if you get to a point in your life or career where you're not breaking through, maybe it's time to sit down with yourself and say, like, am I just happy? Am I not being challenged? Like, what is this? Because it's not always that, okay, I need to move on. But it seems to be one of those indicators of like, maybe I'm just complacent. And I don't think many people are okay with complacency.
I appreciate that comment because a lot of the clients that I see now actually come to me because there's something off.
Yeah.
There's a point in their careers where they kind of like have reached the ceiling and they're like, wait a minute, is this it? And those existential questions are questions that we all have had since humanity was created.
Yeah.
The problem is that sometimes we actually don't pay attention to those questions or we just ignore and put those kind of like things, gut reaction feelings, we just, hide them and we just keep pushing through things. And we turn to living life in autopilot. Yeah. And when we are on autopilot, we're not conscious. So we keep doing like the little hamster in the wheel, putting all these effort and energy and focus and all of that, but we're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that gives people pause when it comes to doing something like starting a company, quitting this company and going to that company, whatever the number of things are, is family. You got to provide for your family. And I think a lot of people are like, if this doesn't work, my family may not eat. They may not get to enjoy the things that they want to, whatever they want to provide for their kids, obviously, which is understandable and great. But you got your family on board early on, it seems like, and you really had them in your corner. What were those conversations with your family like to say, like, I want to do this. Is this going to be okay for you if I try?
There's something very truth about what you're saying, Nathan. And, there's the reality of things, right? There's responsibilities. We're adults and we have, a family to take care of and to provide. I have a family back at home to support as well. So that has been always kind of in the back of my mind. I tell you one thing though, if you're not in a good place, you can't be in a good place to give of yourself to others. So this is going to sound a little selfish, but what I like to tell my clients is that unless you go inward and unless you tend to yourself, unless you take care of your yearnings, of your deep desires to what you want to do and how you want to do things, you're always going to regret that part that you didn't pay attention to. Yeah. And that's going to show in all your other areas of life. So there is a cost of ignoring your true kind of calling. Yeah. And there's a cost if you don't answer that, if you don't pay attention to that. So I think this presents an opportunity to have a both and scenario. You can have conversations with your family. That's what I did. And you can work together to go towards that kind of idea or ideal scenario. And you can make arrangements. You can, change things here and adjust and arrange things so that you can actually pursue that you truly feel a calling for. Wow. And at the same time, end up providing and serving and supporting your family and those you loved. Yeah.
Wow. It's an amazing thought. Yeah. We don't want to give too much of your amazing thoughts away for free. So, it's great. Now looking back 10 years later, it's amazing. I mean, keeping anything going for 10 years, plants, kids, whatever. It's good. Yeah. 10 years later, you look back on all this work. how are you feeling? How are you feeling about where things are going? What, where you want them to go? Reflecting on those 10 years, what does that bring to your mind?
Oh, goodness. Well, first is a sense of pride in a humble way. I'm super proud about where I am nowadays, the ups and downs, the struggles. I think people think that entrepreneurs have like these kind of like, pleasurable life all along, and that it's, nice and pink, and it is not. There's a lot of moments of joy and excitement and success, and there's also a lot of challenges. Because there's not a month that it's the same as the previous month, right? So resilience comes to mind, right? There's a sense of being resilient and having grit to keep going. And looking back, I think it's the one thing that has kept me going is the idea of supporting people and bringing and awakening humanity in the marketplace. I think COVID was a forced wake-up call into that, into reconnecting with our whole beings, our mind, our thoughts, our hearts, our bodies. And that became really a true north in terms of bringing that to corporations, bringing that to organizations, groups of people that work together, and individuals. We need to go back to recognizing that we're human beings. We're not robots, although AI is out there, and that's a little scary, and that is great. It's both great and scary. But there's nothing that will ever replace the human touch. There's nothing that will replace, and I hope there isn't. The human connection, the community that you feel with someone else. So I think those things have kept me going because I see the end result in the person's face when the person lights up and finds a new way of being or a new true north and reconnecting, with their own humanity. And I feel it out there with, productivity. When you are connected to yourself, to your emotions, to your vulnerability, and when you bring that to the work set against what the theory says, the changes are incredible because you create empathy, you connect with the other person. There's this sense of synergy and alignment, and that's beautiful because that helps companies elevate and produce and affect the bottom line for good.
Yeah, we have talked in previous episodes on the podcast about how much of yourself to bring to work because it's tough. It's tough to figure out. Companies are like, we need a product from you, but you're a human being. And COVID really did bring that to the forefront, I think. And since COVID, what have you seen about how workers have changed and about what they want and about how they express what they want to the people or the companies that they're working for?
I think, to be honest, I think that's something that is still being worked out. I think it's a negotiation. Right. What I say is there's more ownership and there's more a sense of self-advocacy for what you need and what works best for you. Because again, with COVID, we were forced to stay in. So when you're like, restrained to like a little box, you have nowhere to go but inward. And I think when we go inward, you learn to know yourself better, to recognize those things that trigger you, or to recognize those things that are, incredible talents and skills that you have. So you start to realize who you really are. And when you're able to own that, then you can come to the table to negotiate in different terms. And I think, it's a negotiation. Is how can we make things be a win-win for both parties, not just for the company producing, but for the people doing it. Listen, if there's no people, there's no bottom line. No people, no production, no money, right? So we really need to pay attention to people and find ways that there's a win-win for both ends.
Yeah, because I thought, being home 100% of the time, being remote 100% of the time, I just don't know if that's the best thing for people. But I know that people who have families and people who have to travel far for work, being home is a game changer for them. And in some ways, people in Chicago used to commute an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours to get to the office. When they don't have to commute that time, that does help the bottom line. It does help them be better at producing things, but at the same time, what's the cost of that? Because there's always a cost to things too.
Correct. I think it's what we were talking a little bit earlier. I think to me it's a both and. It doesn't have to be all at home or remote and or all in the office and in presence. I think there's possibilities for both things to work out. There's flexibility. Yeah. And again, I think those bosses that used to believe that you're productive only if you're in your office from 9 to 5, that kind of leadership is gone. Yeah. Long time ago. That doesn't
they
work
can see
anymore.
You with it, yeah.
Because you can be productive from anywhere in the world. Right? And still be producing and showing results. And it's part of who you are as a professional, right? You own what it's yours to do, and then you're accountable for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think if I were a manager 10 years ago, when you had to see them to see the result, I think I could understand why I'd be like, no, I need you here because I need to see that you're producing. But today it's I don't need to be here or with the other people to know what they're working on or to know where that thing is at. So I think it's understandable why they would feel that way. One of the interesting sort of things that has happened in the last few years is Gen Z is starting to become, to come into corporate America and starting to work post-college. And it has created some very funny trends and very interesting conversations in the office. But obviously a new generation of workers changes things as well. Tell me about Gen Z and how they've had an effect on the workplace or what you've seen.
Nathan, there's so much that we can learn.
Yeah.
There's so much that we can learn from them, from each other. And it becomes almost like a playground. I like to put it this way. It's a different playground. And people are coming with different ideas of what fun is, different ideas of what productive is, different ideas of what teamwork is. Yeah. And I think there's an opportunity for dialogue, for collaboration, for connection beyond the definitions about they are like this or they are like that. Yeah. I think sometimes when we get into definitions, especially they're a demographic and they fit into these block or whatnot, it's very dangerous. And I think there's always an opportunity to know people for who they are. Get curious, ask a lot of questions, and they certainly have a fresh perspective into things. I don't think they're that attached as we are into the rules and what the structure is. I think they're creating that as they go as well. Yeah. And I think one of the things that inspires me about some of them are clients and some of them, work in different capacities in different projects, is there's a little bit of an awe and wonder about life. There's a sense of discovery. There's a sense of seeing things in a different perspective. And that's super valuable. That's what allows us to innovate, to look at things from a different perspective.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.